Welcome back, Goddess of Genesis fam. It's been a couple days since I finished the 500th level of Endless Corridor. So to recap, when this journey started, I was over here on 1-1, and then I finished the first 50 levels, and I did that for the next 10 worlds, till finally beating the 10th world and the 500th level. And if you haven't already, you can check out the playlist I have on my YouTube channel, where I filmed pretty much 450 of those 500 clears. So if you're having any problems with a particular level, you can go back and look at how I did it. And the reason I'm doing this video is I wanted to kind of recap that 500 dungeon journey and what my thinking was, because my thinking and strategy around Endless Corridor evolved as the game changed. Because like when we started out, we didn't have assists, we didn't have Tears of the Nile, we didn't have the twins. So things were very different back then. And the strategy from when I first started playing Endless Corridor to the strategy I'm using now is very different. So I wanted to walk you through what that journey was like so you can kind of decide, if you're still progressing in Endless Corridor, what kind of team do you want to shoot for? You know, what kind of things might you be looking to do so you can get through this journey as well. Now, people have asked about my magic array, since the whole reason you're doing Endless Corridor is to build up your magic array. And the further you progress in Endless Corridor, the more materials you're going to get when you collect your earnings. And by the way, the strategy on earnings is, if you're progressing in Endless Corridor, you should try to hold off on collecting your earnings until you get close to the 48-hour limit. At 48 hours, you stop earning anything. So make sure at the bare minimum, even if you're not progressing in Endless Corridor at all, at least every 2 days, you gotta check in and collect your earnings. And then once you get those, you go to your magic array and you upgrade your stats. These stat improvements are gonna apply to all your characters that have an awakening of level 9 or higher. So getting all your characters that you plan to use to level 9 awakening is really important, because then they'll get these stats. So this is my magic array right now. It's at 229 after fully completing the first 500 levels of Endless Corridor. Now, when I first started playing Endless Corridor, I used a team like this. And as you can see, there's no assists because we didn't have that at the time. I had my standard tank in Joan, I had my healer in Chang'e, I had Artemis for crowd control, I had Lucifer as main DPS, and I had Hades for execute. Hades is actually one of the most important heroes to own for Endless Corridor, because the enemies you encounter have so many hit points. They regularly have like 20 million hit points, and Hades' ultimate lets you execute an enemy when their hit points are below 50%. Like, you immediately kill them, unless they're a boss. But like 95% of the enemies in Endless Corridor can be executed with Hades' ultimate. And when they have 20 million hit points and they can one-shot you because they're so deadly, it's really important that you execute them and get them out of there as soon as possible. So strategy in Endless Corridor is often, if something has 20 million hit points, you do like, 10 million damage, and then Hades finishes them off and does 10 million in the final hit. So if you're looking for like, who do I need on my team in Endless Corridor, Hades is probably number 2. He's the second most important character to have. The most important is going to be the twins, which I will talk about later. But when I first started playing Endless Corridor, the twins did not exist. They hadn't come out yet. So this is the standard team I used. And let me... So I bring that up. So this was the team I used, and the most important member of that team was the tank. I was using Joan as my tank, but you don't have to use Joan. You can use Valkyrie or Marco if you want. But ideally, you have a tank that intercepts, such as Joan or Valkyrie or Marco. And the most important thing was, in my stats, I had 166 physical evasion. Now, I didn't start with that, obviously. I think at the beginning, my physical evasion was pretty low. It was like 100%. And you mainly do that through gems. If you look, I've been farming gems that have high physical evasion. So it's important that you build up that stat. And also, if you have enchants, which I ended up getting later, like this enchant is plus 40% physical evasion. If you start stacking them through Gear Fusion, you can go back and look at my Gear Fusion video on how to do that if you are unsure about enchants. So evasive enchants are really good, and gems that have physical evasion, like these. And once your tank gets up to, I want to say at least 150% physical evasion, then they'll have a very good chance of dodging, like I'd say maybe 4 out of 5 incoming physical attacks. So the enemies in Endless Corridor hit so hard that if they hit you, there's a strong chance they're going to one-shot your tank, if it's a physical attack. So that's why it was really important for my tank in Endless Corridor to be able to dodge the majority of attacks, because you cannot survive the attacks when they're that powerful. Now, if you look, my magic evasion is only 31%. Like ideally, I would have had high physical evasion and high magic evasion, at least 100 of each. I didn't get that far, but then at a certain point, I stopped using a tank in Endless Corridor, and that's why I didn't focus on this set as much. But if you are using a tank in Endless Corridor, you should seriously consider building up your physical evasion for that dungeon, because it's pretty important for your tank's survivability that they're able to dodge the attacks in Endless Corridor. Because if they keep getting hit, chances are your tank is probably not going to survive very long, and then the rest of your team is going to fall apart as well. Now, when you're first starting out in Endless Corridor, like I said, the most important character on your team is your tank, because they have to be able to survive the attacks. But the second most important character is going to be your Quick Burst DPS. For me, I use Lucifer. As you can see, I never got her gear to like level 70 for the armor. I never purpled out her weapon, the Funeral of the Gods. So, gear wasn't super important. I mean, it definitely helps. You definitely want to improve your trinket and your weapon to level 70 as soon as you can for your Quick Burst DPS, because that'll give them more strength, so they'll be more powerful. Now, I highly recommend having a Quick Burst DPS in the beginning, because you need to eliminate enemies like Mary, who can one-shot your team with a big AoE at the beginning. And when someone is a huge threat like that, like Artemis, Mary, any of those danger characters that are high priority, you need to be able to remove them like within 1 or 2 turns. If you're doing it in 2 turns, you need someone like Artemis to hit them with a stun so that they can't move in the first turn, and then by the second turn you have enough DPS that you can use someone like Hades to come in and finish them off with his ultimate. As you can see, if you're using a team like Hades and Lucifer, who have these 3-cost ultimates, if you can find a Horn of Judgment, it'll give you more energy so that you can afford to cast all these abilities, especially Lucifer, who can use up a lot of energy if she doesn't manage to crit. And then Hades' Execute is going to be using 3 energy a turn, so you definitely want to have enough to afford that. Now, if you don't have Lucifer as a DPS, initially I was using Lilith, but I found that Lilith was too slow for Endless Corridor, because a lot of times she would need to do her skill 2 and then her ultimate, and that's 2 turns, and a lot of times you don't have 2 turns to deal with someone like Mary right away. So if you're using Lilith as your main DPS, I would strongly consider switching to Lucifer, which is what I did. I didn't have Lucifer built up at the beginning of Endless Corridor. I actually had to stop and start building her, and then after I got her, then Endless Corridor started becoming a lot easier. If you don't have Lucifer for some reason, even though she was the free hero, you can also use a character like Gaia. Gaia at like 5 or 6 stars can be really strong. My Gaia is still being built, as you can see. I think Mulan can also be a heavy hitter, and Princess Longji, who recently came out, can also be a very good, strong hitting DPS. But anyone who can do a lot of damage very quickly in a short amount of time, that's what you're looking for to fill that secondary role in Endless Corridor. Now, this was the main team I was using in the beginning, but at the beginning I also said that you can't use the exact same team through all of Endless Corridor, because the strategies change and you need to do different things. And what I was talking about is this is the secondary team that I started using for all the single boss fights. So whenever you're fighting a single enemy, a lot of times I would use this team. And what this team consists of is you have your strong single target DPS in Lucifer or whoever, Mulan, Gaia, Longji, whoever you're going to use in that category. You have Hades, of course, for execute. And then you've got this trio in the middle. And now, even though I use Joan as my tank, I switched to Valkyrie for the single bosses because the strategy is Valkyrie intercepts all the attacks. Lancelot always does his skill 2, which is a taunt. So Lancelot casts taunt every turn so that the boss can't cast whatever ability they want to cast. And then Valkyrie intercepts the attack on Lancelot. And then the reason Poseidon is here is because he provides a shield with his ultimate. So what happens is every turn Lancelot taunts, Valkyrie intercepts the attack, and Valkyrie is shielded either by her skill or Poseidon's ultimate, which each have a 1-turn cooldown. So you alternate between Valkyrie's shield and Poseidon's shield, and she intercepts the attack every time. And then meanwhile, Lucifer is dealing her main DPS with her ultimate. And then I have all these poisons in the support role. So they're adding additional damage over time, as well as increasing Lucy's ability to crit because of the poison that they're adding. So this was the strategy I used for a lot of single boss enemies in Endless Corridor. And then eventually you tend not to need this team or the other team either. But before I get into that, I want to talk about one of the items that really changed the game in Endless Corridor, and that is Tears of the Nile. Tears of the Nile is, I think, the most important piece of equipment to own in Endless Corridor. And it is so important that I would suggest, if you don't have Tears of the Nile, consider summoning on an equipment banner to get it. I think the best way to get Tears of the Nile, if you don't have one already, is actually through purchasing it. If you're not free to play, they offer like a gear selector pack that comes around a couple times. We've already had it like 2 times at least, where you can just choose, okay, I want this one piece of equipment, and it costs $20, so it's not super cheap. But if you're trying to progress in Endless Corridor, it's going to be very difficult if you do not have Tears of the Nile. And the reason why is, if you look at, how can I explain this? If you look at Source on Tears of the Nile, it's only available from gear summoning. And that means it's different from a lot of the traditional gear that you have. So for example, if you look at something like the or Nuada's Silver Hand, right? Like this is a regular trinket. And if you look, Nuada's Silver Hand, you can get from the Honor Shop packs, the Memory Shop packs, gear summoning. It can be a drop in Astral Shore, whereas Tears of the Nile didn't have that. And when I say packs, I mean like these things, these monthly gambles, the memory gambles. Like you cannot get a Tears of the Nile from this. It's only available from summoning. And what that means is, if you're free to play, you can only get Tears of the Nile either through an equipment summon banner like this, which is going to require most likely 30 Genesis Tarot, which is a lot, or you can get it from the free summon here on the left, but the chances of that are very slim. So if you're free to play, Tears of the Nile is not going to be a drop that you can probably get unless you get lucky in the free summon that you get every day, unless you're willing to spend the 30 Genesis Tarot. And even then, on an equipment banner, you only, like if you spend 30 Genesis Tarot, you will get one of these 4. So you're not even guaranteed to get it. So you could lose everything on a 25% chance to get Tears of the Nile, which is not ideal. But if there's any one equipment in the game that you, like I say, you really need this, it's Tears of the Nile. It's super important for Endless Corridor, and I'll go into that later. By the way, speaking of Tears of the Nile, it is part of it's part of this group of equipment. If you look, all of these items are in that pool of exclusive equipment, so you're not going to be able to get these as a drop from Astral Shore. So you've got things like Molnir, Tears of the Nile, Broken Dawn, Messiah Robe, Dragon Protector, I think. So all of these items are you're only going to get pretty much from gear summoning. Now, the reason Tears of the Nile is so important is it gives a 35% chance to silence enemies. So what the combo was, let me see here. Whenever I had a group of enemies, I would try to either stun them with Artemis, attack them with Lucifer, and then execute with Hades. But then there's a lot of times there's like 7 enemies in Endless Corridor, and you can't obviously remove 7 enemies in like 2 or 3 turns before your tank dies. So what I ended up doing is using casters to cast Tears of the Nile, so they cast an AoE, and then if I can't eliminate an enemy, at least I can silence them. And when they're silenced, they can't do their big like AoE attacks. They're forced to do just a basic attack. And if your tank can dodge that, then you're in much better shape. So being able to silence enemies through your AoE attacks is really important. Now, if you're sitting there and you're free to play and you're thinking, great, this guy just told me that I need this really important trinket and there's almost no way that I can get it, well, fear not, because the solution to not having Tears of the Nile as a free-to-play player is actually summoning Demeter. If you look at the heroes, this is the upcoming hero banner, which I can link to in the caption. Right now we're on 4/14, the week where Mephisto came out. And if you look, Demeter is coming out in about a month. Around 5/12 is when we should get the banner for Demeter. And she's an Earth Mage, and her ability is she can cast poison AoE just like anyone, but she also has a chance to silence. So Demeter is an Earth Mage who has a built-in Tears of the Nile. So if you're free to play, I highly recommend saving up your vouchers. Don't try to summon for Mephisto. Don't try to summon for Garuda. Save as many as you can and get a copy of Demeter, because she can be your free-to-play version of Tears of the Nile.